Okay. It didn't say recording.
Not flashing though.
Yeah,
A little dot in the screen sharing, your screen sharing, that little dot's going, so.
We're good then. Okay, so
on
we're gonna
Zoom,
upload
it's
this to LinkedIn
recording.
Learning. And then, so anybody that's off contract, when you come back, you'll be able to watch the one in May just on LinkedIn Learning and check that as complete for your compliance training. I don't know if I'll re-record this every year, but if there's any updates or anything like that, of course we will. So you have your handouts, which go along with the PowerPoint as we go through. You can take any notes like, hey, Robin did great on her training. She's a great speaker. All of those things you can write alongside your screen, okay? All right, so we'll get started. All right, so Family Medical Leave Act. Family Medical Leave Act was passed in 1993 by Bill Clinton. It's one of the only federal laws out there that protect employees from getting terminated if they get sick or their spouse gets sick or their child gets sick or they have a baby or anything like that. So prior to the FMLA, a lady could get pregnant and her boss could say, well, I'm sorry, I don't want pregnant people working here. You're fired because I don't want to give you the time off when you have the baby. Right? So prior to that, that could happen. So FMLA is unpaid job protected leave. The federal government did not pass paid job protected leave. They passed unpaid. So you can take up to 12 weeks of that off, but it's job protected. So I need to make sure you understand that it is unpaid job protected leave. It's one of the most beneficial benefits to employees that the federal government has ever passed. And it's important that you guys know certain things about it because there are requirements if you are a supervisor for you to know because you supervise employees. Okay. So this particular slide used to have a whole bunch of information, basically gobbledygook and legalese about who is required to have FMLA and who's required to adhere to the law. The main thing you didn't need to know is that Grayson College is a covered employer. So we are required to adhere to FMLA. Okay. So employees that are eligible, who's eligible? The employees that work here, because we're a covered employer. Employees that have worked here for at least 12 months, and it doesn't have to be consecutive. Okay. So you can be an employee here for 6 months. You can leave, go somewhere else to another employer, come back 18 months later, work another 6 months, and you're eligible for FMLA. Okay. You have to work at least 1,250 hours during those 12 months. And of course, this location and South Campus are covered. It does not say full-time or part-time. So a part-time employee can work 1,250 hours in 12 months if they're working that many hours a week, right? So they could be eligible for FMLA. So don't say to any employee, you're part-time, you're not eligible, because that may not be true. Let HR calculate that for you. Okay. And again, it goes over 12 months of employment do not need to be consecutive. If they leave, it only starts over if they've been gone for 7 years. Okay. All right. Any questions, comments, takeaways from this little section? It's job protection for employees. We offer it to our employees. They get that. Part-time and full-time are eligible if they've worked at Grayson for 12 months and 1,250 hours. And if you're not sure if someone's eligible, call HR. Every one of these slideshows will end with call HR. You're not sure. Okay. So there's several reasons to take FMLA. I know this is fascinating, isn't it? I know it's totally fascinating. It is to me, but I like to read this kind of stuff. There's several reasons that people can take FMLA: birth of a child, care for their newborn child, placement of a child in adoption or foster care, to care for their spouse, child, parent with a serious health condition because of a serious health condition of their own, military duties, active status, of course, and then to care for a covered service member. So there's some states, which I find this interesting, there's some states that are now passing paid leave and job protected unpaid leave for siblings, because we're getting to the age where we're starting to take care of our brother that's sick and things like that. So other states are starting to include more relatives and more close, immediate family relatives. FMLA does not include that yet. Just a little
9
interesting info. So birth of a child,
Yes.
they get up to 12 weeks off. Both the mother and the father are entitled to take that.
Maybe just
So we don't have.
I want y'all to do, a brief, like a
That's
presentation,
a relic
the stuff that we have to.
of way
each
back. When you talk about maternity leave, paternity
So
leave,
I'll send
those
it
type of things where maternity leave was,
email.
12 weeks, and then paternity leave was I got a week.
Have it laid out the
Anybody
questions.
remember anything like that?
There'll be a different group of people.
That's
So-
not up
Involved.
to date. It's not modern today's time. It's
And it will-
FMLA. The father
Yeah.
gets up to 12 weeks as well.
That,
So, and another change that has happened in the last several years is it used to be that pregnant women could not get their FMLA until they had the baby.
all right, sounds
That
great.
has changed. So now they're including the bed rest, right? So if the mother is struggling and starting to have some medical issues with the pregnancy, they're including the bed rest time, they're including the morning sickness time, those things. So just be aware if you have someone who is expecting in your area, make sure HR is aware so that we can start getting them FMLA paperwork and going from there. And also the spouse of the expectant mother can use FMLA to accompany the mother for prenatal appointments, and that's new. So it's starting to become where the government is starting to realize that, hey, having a baby is not just that 6 weeks that we used to get after we had the baby, right? It's a whole thing that goes on for months. So I feel like the government's catching on to this thing that probably women have already known, and the spouses of women. So all right. So you also have child placement and bonding. So if you're adopting or fostering children and you get a new placement in your home, you can take FMLA for that 12 weeks of bonding time. So that's important for supervisors to know, because we may not think about that. We may have an employee out there that says, yes, we foster children in our home, and it doesn't, click, because we're like, oh, that's so nice of you. That's great of you. But we don't think about how that relates to employment and to FMLA. So make sure that you remember that key point, fostering and adoption. All right, then we have a serious health condition of the employees, right? So that's the one that we're most familiar with. People come to us and say, I'm sick, or I have something going on. I may need to have surgery. My spouse is having surgery. My child's having surgery. Any of those things come about, then we know those are normal FMLA things that we're going to call HR, get some FMLA paperwork going on. We also have military service. I'm not going to sit and read slides all to you, but just so you know, if you have someone who is in the military or anything like that in your area, please review this PowerPoint to make sure if they come to you and there's anything happening that you're up to date on these particular areas. All right. And then if you have an employee that has an immediate family member that is a service member, be aware of it there as well. If they come back with any issues, Doesn't matter if it's a physical injury or not. It could be a mental injury or illness. So be aware of that, you know, if you have an employee that spouse is sent overseas and comes back and they have something going on, maybe post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that, and your employee needs to take off to help them, this could come into play as well. So one of the ways that we calculate the 12 weeks is a rolling 12-month period. Again, in here, the government lists several ways that you can calculate FMLA. Grayson College has chosen a rolling 12 months. So they use the 12 weeks. And then when that first week comes back around, they start gaining those weeks back to them. Okay. So I've had people who, of course, have figured out FMLA and know how to use it to their advantage, right? You have that in every organization. I used to, when I was in healthcare, somehow there was this one employee that figured out that she could schedule some type of surgery every year and be off Thanksgiving through New Year's, right? And her supervisor was so frustrated, and her coworkers didn't really like her a whole lot because she wasn't there to help, and that means they had to pick up those shifts, right? So, you know, anyway, that's just it. But they figured out how to, but it doesn't matter how you do it, someone will figure out how to work it. Okay, so here's a little different thing. If spouses work at the same company and they have the child, then they each don't get the 12 weeks. They combine it into 12 weeks. So that's a little bit different. All right, FMLA can be used in intermittent and reduced leave. The way that the law lists it, the employer has to provide intermittent leave in the same way that they would provide in increments of the time clock. So if your time clock goes down to 15-minute increments and it rounds in that way, then you have to provide leave in 15-minute increments. Haven't had anybody say, I want to take my FMLA in 15-minute increments, but we have to provide it that way if they do. So, you know, it could be, 12 weeks, could be 84 days, and then it starts working their way down to that 15-minute increments, which may be 64,000, 327 15-minute increments a year.
Right.
And you've used 16,000 of them. So this is how many you have left. Hopefully I don't ever get anybody that does that. But if we do, I'm certain that Janet would figure out how to calculate it. I have no doubt. All right. So they can use it in reduced work days. So if they say, oh, well, I can only work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because I have a chemotherapy or something on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they can do that. And then we must accommodate that as long as it's medically necessary. Okay. Any questions so far? I know it's really yes. That's right. If he asked if the intermittent still applies to the total volume of what they can use. So if an employee has FMLA and say they only use 1 day a week, it's pretty much going to go on. That's 84 weeks of 1 day a week. And then by the time it rolls, they're gaining that back. So, an employee using FMLA in that way would pretty much never run out. It would just always be rolling. So, but, up to 12 weeks a year, they don't have to use it all, right? Any other questions?
You said it's unpaid, but they can use PTO and what?
Yeah, I'm gonna go over that in just a minute. Yeah. But FMLA covers unpaid, but yes. Okay. Why is my, there we go. Okay. So if somebody requests FMLA, we can transfer them to an alternative position. It has to be a completely equal position. in all things, even perception, which I would argue is probably the most important part of it, right? So if the person can't do the essential functions of the job and you have to move, like say, I can't give you 12 weeks of FMLA in this role because I really need this role filled. So I need to move this person over here and this person over there. They have to be equal pay, equal hours, equal stature, equal perception, right? We don't do that a lot because you usually don't have that many people on that same level all the time, right? We have some administrative assistants and some, things like that, that you might could say, oh, this is a completely lateral move with no change, but we don't have a whole lot because some people have more duties than others, right? Okay. All right. So the FMLA does not require paid leave, but we can require that you use paid leave. So if you go out on FMLA, we can require that you use your leave concurrently. So you use up your sick time during your use of FMLA. And the reason why most employers do that is to ensure that you have a paycheck to pay your insurance premiums, right? So you're using up all that paid leave time, sick time, PTO, personal days to get those premiums paid. They can run concurrently. They do not run separately. Very important. You make sure your employee understands that, or HR make sure they understand that just because they have 12 weeks of sick pay doesn't mean they get 12 weeks of sick pay plus 12 weeks of FMLA. They run at the same time. They only get the 12 weeks.
So we do require that?
We do require they use paid leave. Yes. Any questions on that?
I just have a question. If our premium is paid, is
if we have a person who uses 1 day a month, are we still require them to use?
If they're not here and they're not doing any work, then they should be using some type of pay. Yeah. To keep their full-time status or their exempt status or what have you.
If they run out of PTO.
If they run out, we have the sick leave pool, which is another thing that's there to help them not only get paid, but also to ensure their benefit premiums are paid. And I don't mean that to sound like the college is making sure it's taken care of necessarily. If a person is sick, they need their insurance, right? So, I mean, it's beneficial to both. But we have the sick leave pool. And so then what we do, what HR does is we start trying to give them some sick pay through the sick leave pool.
so if the college
Try to
pays
get
for
them
the,
to reach through their 12 weeks.
so if the
So
college
anytime you
pays,
have extra sick pay, make sure you email Janet and donate it to the sick leave pool.
So if they are part-time, they don't have PTO.
If they're part-time, they just go unpaid and they don't have benefit premiums to pay.
so is the premium,
Anybody else?
Yes. Yes.
Any questions on the chat?
Yes. Oh, chat.
Okay. Somebody raising their hand on Zoom? Go ahead, Lisa.
Can you hear me?
Oh, let's see. We can't hear you. Will you type in your question?
Yeah, I'll try.
Which way am I going? Oh, okay. Here we go. I don't know if the mic's not working. We'll come back to it. Okay, so we can require medical certification. What we do is HR will send an FMLA document that goes to the doctor's office, and either the employee can hand carry that, or we'll fax that or email that to the doctor's office to fill out. A lot of doctors' offices charge for filling out that paperwork now, You'll notice the next time you go to the doctor, there'll be a note that says $25 will be charged for filling out FMLA paperwork. Because they have to sit down and fill out a lot of information that takes up their time. So there's things that we need to be certified. So serious health conditions, family members' health conditions, military family leave, and covered service member for military family leave. Employees must be given at least 15 calendar days to provide that document. So they can go out and then they get at least 15 calendar days to show it to us. So what can happen in HR is they can go out, we can not hear from them for 2 weeks. We assume that, oh, they've just abandoned their job. They're gone. We don't know where they are. So we terminate them. And then they show up with FMLA paperwork saying they were in a car accident and in a coma for 2 weeks or something. And then we have to reinstate them and go from there. So that's pretty rare occurrence. It has happened to me once. It wasn't 2 weeks, but it was about 4 days that the person was incapacitated in the hospital and we had no clue. So, and then we found out and reinstated her and went from there. So it can happen, that's for sure. Okay, just give HR a call, let us know. Any chat info, Chelsea?
So never mind.
Oh, Lisa. You can send me an email, Lisa, if you want to, if that would be better. I don't know why the mic's not working. Okay, so the notice requirements. So this is something that comes up pretty frequently as far as what employees are required to do and how much time employees are required to give us. So an employee is supposed to give us at least 30 days whenever possible of notice of FMLA leave, of them needing it. Is that always going to happen? No, because they can't, because it could be an emergency, right? If they wake up in the middle of the night and need an emergency appendectomy, they can't give us a 30-day notice. So, but one of the things that's important to know as a supervisor, and I have this in bold up here, is what your employees will kind of come to you and your employees will say, hey, I have, I just wanted to let you know my mom's sick. As a supervisor, you have to know they've just notified you that they may need FMLA. And your response is, hey, you should give HR a call and let them know that you may need FMLA. They may not be asking for it, but courts have found that employees don't have to specifically say FMLA for your supervisor notification requirements. They just have to tell you a covered condition. That's why it's so important for you to know what those things are, because it's your responsibility to notify them. Okay, so an employee comes in and says, my mom has cancer. I may have to take her to radiation treatments. They've notified you. And you have to recognize that you've heard it. Okay. Emails. If you get something like that through an email, please respond with, you may need FMLA, please call HR. And that way you've notified them. They've notified you, you've notified them. Yes, Becky?
So it's not the supervisor's responsibility to contact HR, it's the employee's responsibility.
So the supervisor can also contact HR. I'm okay with supervisors calling HR and the employee. I just want to make sure you're covered and that when you're in that conversation, whether in person or email, that you're saying you may need FMLA, please contact HR. And you've got and documented that you've kind of said that you had that conversation. So you met your checkbox.
Would you recommend too that if it's a verbal conversation between you and your employee, that you follow it up with an email?
Sure,
Okay.
I would. I mean, yes.
What about in that follow-up email also including HR in that? Or
You
not?
could, yeah. I mean, it's a notification either way, and we've responded.
So I found that usually when you're having those conversations, people are not always in the right mindset to hear everything that you're saying. So I don't think they do to follow, just so they can read it after they've heard it, then they can ask questions.
Right, right. It's a good idea. Can everybody on Zoom hear that? Okay. Does anybody on Zoom have any questions about notifications? Okay. So, within 5 business days after the employee has provided enough information, we have to respond. And we send a document just saying, hey, you're eligible for FMLA or you're not eligible for FMLA. And if they are eligible for FMLA, for how long and what the dates were that the doctor put down. And if they're not, why they're not. Either they, hadn't worked the 12 months or hadn't worked the 1,250 hours, or it's not a condition that's covered. Something like that might be cosmetic procedures. Some of those cosmetic procedures, like if someone has a breast augmentation or a tummy tuck or something like that, that's not a required medical issue. They may not be covered under FMLA. But if they go get that done and it causes some kind of serious other problem that puts them in the hospital, like an infection, that's covered. So it could change, right? So it's good that you're keeping up with your employees and knowing what's going on. FMLA can be retroactively applied to absences. So let's say you have an employee that missed a lot of work in February for 3 weeks. They missed work, they kept calling in sick every other day, something like that. And you put them on like a corrective action for absences and for attendance, violation of attendance policy. And then they go into the doctor's office in August, find out that they have cancer, and that's what caused them to be ill in February. It can be retroactively applied back to those February dates. Your performance management write-up is removed and their FMLA is covered. And now their job is protected. Any questions on that? Okay. Hey, key takeaways. FMLA covers employees and dependents for serious health conditions. It can be used intermittently. It's very detailed. I mean, I didn't write this down, but it's very detailed. It's why it's so important that you loop in HR because things can change. There are little caveats to the law that are important and that I try to keep up on. And it changes all the time, even though it's a 30-year-old law already. There's still court cases going through where there's new things where, judges are making decisions about what this means and what that means all the time, right? So we have to keep up to date on what those things are all. All right, so here's a little quiz. We love quizzes. Just shout out the answer. You may win like a prize. I don't have any right here, but I'll hit you back on that. All right. So your employee spouse calls and notifies you that the employee has been admitted to the hospital overnight. Do you notify HR of possible FMLA?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. The employee tells you that they have a sister that's ill. Could this be FMLA notification?
Maybe. Not yet.
It's a trick one. His sisters aren't covered. I just threw you off talking about that those other states. Sneaky. Okay. All right. So our FMLA policies are DEC, DECA, and yes.
Are sisters covered if they're like a minor?
Good question. Yes. If you're their legal guardian from a court of law, then yes, they are your dependents. Yeah. Good question. Okay. All right. So our FMLA policy, these are in addition to FMLA. We expect employees that are going to be absent for more than 5 days to call HR about possible FMLA. That's what our policy says. And then another part of our policy, not just requiring that paid leave is concurrent, But also available paid leave must be used before unpaid leave will be granted at all. So they have to use all of it. Yes, Lori.
With the doctor's notice? The 5 days?
So for what, for FMLA will have a doctor's notice. Yeah.
Oh, that's for.
Yeah. So we don't typically require like doctor's notes from people. Yeah. If it's under 5 days. Okay. All right. So our requirements as an employer, we have to put things in the handbook, put up posters, put up things like that. We have to continue health benefits at the same level before the start of FMLA leave as they have the whole time. And we have to reinstate the employee to the same or an equivalent position when they come back. So a few things not to do. Do not ask in an interview, do you think you'll need FMLA anytime soon?
Yeah.
Okay. If someone's on FMLA or intermittent FMLA, do not ask them for a doctor's note every time they miss. They've already certified that if HR's already certified their leave under FMLA, then it could be seen as you're retaliating or interfering with their FMLA use. Okay. So don't interfere with it. That's one of the most common mistakes. One of the most frequent legal challenges in court is supervisors interfering when we don't realize we're interfering with someone's use of leave. Every time I click off of my thing, it goes. Okay. So what is an example of interference? Discouraging an employee from using FMLA through words or actions. You got to be careful about what you say, how you act, if you roll your eyes, things like that, right? We're all human, so we have facial expressions. Go stoic for me. Okay. So failing to tell them about their FMLA leave. So as supervisors, if they come to us and they say, oh, well, I have this going on with my child, and we don't tell them, oh, you may need FMLA, you should call HR, that can be seen as interference. Because you're not notifying them of their right. I mean, as adults, we tend to think, well, they should know their rights, right? But what if they're 18, just got out of high school? They don't know yet because they haven't been in the working world for very long. But as supervisors, we know. So the onus is on us to notify that employee that they're eligible, that they may be eligible, that Grayson College is an employer that does FMLA. Don't ask them to delay their leave. So if they say, I've got to have surgery in a week, don't say, can you wait till next month? Right? Okay. And then requiring an employee to work while on leave. I tell everybody, please don't call them when they're on leave. Please don't call someone or email them when they're on leave, because it's easier as an HR person to just do a blanket statement. Just don't do it. There are reasons you can, if it's just like transitional information. But as long as they're not like actually working, like, hey, you know, where do we find this? Is usually okay. So that's why you just want to be careful. Just if somebody's on leave and you have some questions for them, call me. Let's talk through the questions, and then we can kind of decide which ones would be worth disturbing someone on their leave and not, because that can also be seen as interference, that you wouldn't let them have their leave because they just had to get their job done. Okay, so retaliation is the second most common. Retaliating against employees who exercise FMLA leave, doing corrective actions for attendance or performance during their leave, doing corrective actions or attendance for performance as soon as they return. So those things we need to kind of talk about, or say an employee comes back from FMLA and they've been back for 2 or 3 months and a job promotion comes open and you don't consider them because they use their leave. And that could be really subtle and a bias that you have to be really careful of, because it may not be that you're not promoting them because they use their leave, but you're not promoting them because they weren't here for 3 months before, which is the same thing in essence, right? You kind of have to like erase that part of time from your memory. Or saying something like, oh, well, changing your schedule is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem letting you leave at 3 p.m. every day. I can't. Let HR kind of coach you through that part. And it's important to understand that as supervisors, you can be held legally liable for these things yourself individually. I'm sure Grayson College will help you as long as you did everything right, right? When I worked for another company, they used to say, we will give you an attorney as long as you did everything right. If you didn't, then you get your own. It was very employee friendly. I'm sure you can tell. Okay. All right. So let's go over the ADA section. This one's a little bit shorter. So I should have you out of here on time or maybe early. So the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 was the first comprehensive civil rights law in this country that addressed the needs of people with disabilities. We are an employer, of course, that provides ADA. We have a lot of ADA structures here in the college. And then we also ask questions during the hiring process. You may see where it says, can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation? That's an ADA question. Okay, so that's inquiring like, hey, do you need anything? It's essential for you guys as supervisors and the HR staff to know how to comply with this law. So the covered employment practices that are covered under the ADA are recruitment, pay, hiring, firing, training, job assignment, promotion, benefits, tenure, layoff, leave, and any employment related activity. So anything regarding employment from the start to the finish is covered under ADA. So we also cannot retaliate against employees for using ADA or applicants for using ADA. That's a frequent one, not here at Grayson College, but that's a frequent one that you see in legal with court cases going through. Is they retaliated against me because in the application process, I asked for accommodations in filling out the application. So they went to the HR office and said, I'm struggling to fill out an application. Can you help me? And they were like, no, we can't help you. You just have to go home and figure it out on your computer. Right? You can see that happening, right? But that can be a violation of ADA if the reason why they're struggling is because they have a disability that's covered under ADA. Okay, so the important thing is the disability. With the disability, it has to be a substantial disability that covers one or more major life activities. And the law describes what those life activities are: working, sleeping, eating, moving. Those things are life activities that a human being needs to have. So if that disability covers those things, then it could be covered under ADA. Yes.
Confused by something, because
Yes.
it seems to contradict. Because it says that it must substantially limit one or more, but then it says it need not prevent or significantly restrict. So what's the difference? I'm confused by the difference there.
I can't think of an example right now to give you that might work for why that's different. So let me think on it and get back with you on it.
Okay.
I'm sure in legalese, there's something around the why they had to put both of those in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it does sound contradictory.
It does a little bit, yeah, but in some type of way it isn't. So let me look it up and
Okay,
see what we can find.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So some disabilities, substance abuse can be considered a disability. So a recovering alcoholic, that could be a disability. Current alcohol, like drinking alcohol at work, is not an ADA covered thing, even if they're an alcoholic, right? Current drug use is not considered, but a recovering drug addict could be. Okay, so we have to be careful about not retaliating, refusing to hire, things like that. Okay, so a drug addict is protected if he or she is receiving recovery treatment and is not current. So a person addicted to drugs, but is no longer using drugs illegally and receiving treatment is protected under the ADA from discrimination. So here's the main part that I need to get to, that's takeaways for supervisors, is reasonable accommodations. What happens is, and it happens frequently and it happens in every organization, is you have an employee come to you and that employee says, hey, I can no longer do A as part of my job because of my arthritis. I can no longer type as part of my job because of my arthritis. And we don't call HR and we just say, oh, okay, well, I'll just have so-and-so do the typing for you now. And then what happens?
So-and-so gets annoyed.
So-and-so gets super annoyed after a while that they are now having to do part of this person's job plus their own. And then we as supervisors are going to eventually get frustrated that this person can't do that, right? But that was an essential function of that job, being able to type. So that was not an accommodation that would have been considered reasonable for their role, and we wouldn't have made it. And we would have said, I'm sorry, you'll have to choose another role then, or, apply for something else. So that's something that I would work through with our college attorney, and we would review those things. We'd review the job description, review the disability form. So if anybody comes to you and says they have something going on that's a disability, just loop me in. Because I have forms for it. Like we have a process in place for that. And what happens is our heartstrings go out and we don't think about what could happen in the future, right? It's very common, but I'd like it not to be common. I'd like for it to be rare. And it just kind of go through HR. So essential functions. If you look at our job descriptions, there is a section that says essential functions, right? It's there because that's an ADA compliant job description. So when you're writing job descriptions, you have to make sure that you have those essential functions, things that you absolutely can are deal breakers if they can't do. That's the whole point of that section. Okay. We can make some accommodations. We can do things. We've made accommodations for people to be able to perform those essential functions. Like say someone needs to stand here at this podium, but they're only 3.5 feet tall. Right? So then you would buy them a step stool or a shorter podium or something like that. Those things that are reasonable, that don't cost a whole lot of money, that would enable them to be able to do their job successfully. So there's all kinds of things that we can do. There's some things we can't. We have to review those things and make sure it's reasonable. I usually give the example of when I worked at the hospital. We had an employee who had gotten to where she could no longer walk. She could not get in and out of her car. No one called HR to let HR know that this was happening. And we had employees the supervisor had employees going down to this employee's car, getting her out of her car, wheelchairing her up to the unit, helping her when she needed to go to the restroom from her chair to the toilet, and then up, and then taking her back down to her car every day for her to do her job. How do you think the employees that were having to do that work felt?
Not good.
How many do you think hurt their back? And, you know, by doing that work? So that would not have been a reasonable accommodation. You'd have to be able to get to your workstation to do your job. Okay. Okay, they can't create an undue hardship. That was an undue hardship. Okay, and then when we take away essential functions and start tolerating the poor performance, right? So we don't have to tolerate poor performance just because they have a disability. That's not an accommodation. So an example there would be maybe an employee is starting to show signs of dementia or some kind of illness like that. And you're starting to see that they're forgetting things or they're not getting projects completed, things like that. So call HR so we can talk through that and see what we need to do. Okay, so one of the takeaways: do not make any accommodation or agreement for light duty work without contacting HR. Just simple as that. Just say, I hear you, let's call HR. See what we can do. Okay. All right. Any final questions? You have survived your 1-year compliance training of FMLA and ADA. I only saw a few nod offs, so I'm proud of that. It is between 2 and 3. It's hard to stay awake after that lunchtime, you know, that's a nap time. So any questions for me? Any questions on Zoomy Zoom? Nope.
Something in chat.
Oh. That's Mike said yes and no. Thank you, Mike. All right, thank you guys. Y'all have a good day. Thank you on Zoom. This will be uploaded to LinkedIn Learning